Super Paper Mario was a huge commercial success at launch, but due to stepping away from the RPG formula of the first two games, its legacy for fans of the series would be somewhat mixed. While it definitely has its audience, whether or not the new gameplay was better or worse than that of the original Paper Mario was debatable, though most can agree that the developers were at least trying something creative. However, SPM did not lay out the path which series would take, but instead began the process of stripping the games away from its RPG roots, and the fourth game released on the Nintendo 3DS in 2012 abandoned it entirely. It was another commercial hit, selling 2.47 million units by December 2019, but regarding its quality, it may be the most divisive game in the franchise and is often cited as the point where Paper Mario lost its edge. But is that a fair legacy for the title, and is it really as bad as those people say it is, or does it deserve to be maligned for failing to keep the magic afloat? Well, it's time to find out. This is Paper Mario Sticker Star. Sticker Star was not only the first Paper Mario game designed for a handheld system, but also the first that would see Ryota Kawade, the director of the first three games, step away from development. Instead, work began not long after Super Paper Mario's release under Paper Mario's art director Naohiko Aoyama, with an early prototype developed in 2009. The initial goal was simply to integrate the stereoscopic 3D capabilities of the 3DS, but Shigeru Miyamoto noted that this demo felt too much like a port of TTYD and requested Intelligent Systems come up with something different. In response, the developers introduced the idea of collecting and using stickers to both combat enemies and solve puzzles, and also put more attention into the paper element. However, the designers realized that the stickers conflicted with the partner system, which they ultimately removed as it wasn't cooperating with the sticker gameplay. This wasn't the only RPG mechanic that was discarded, as while turn-based battles returned, mechanics like experience points, dedicated battle commands, and traditional level-ups were taken out. The team presented another prototype in the spring of 2011, but Miyamoto still had lingering issues, in particular the inclusion of an in-depth story. He didn't believe that the series needed to put so much attention into the narrative, and so pushed the team towards de-emphasizing the story. As part of this request, he also asked the team to not create any new characters or species wherever possible, and as such, the only character not represented by an already present species is the main companion Kirsty. Aspects like age and gender specifically weren't to be highlighted as well, and as such, the writers focused on personality and dialogue, with the team bringing in Super Mario RPG designer Taro Kudo to help write the script and co-direct the game. This is the most controversial aspect of Sticker Star's development, as a lot of people interpret this as one person in a high position overstepping the boundary regarding their involvement in the game. Shigeru Miyamoto is undoubtedly a Nintendo juggernaut, and as such, his word does carry a lot of weight around the company, and this is not the first time he's demanded changes on a project he's overseeing. And to his point, there was evidence supporting the lack of need for a story. A Club Nintendo survey conducted before Sticker Star began development revealed that less than 1% liked the story of Super Paper Mario, which, if you recall, was where the narrative received the most attention. It's also worth noting that in interviews, the staff at Intelligent Systems, or at least the lead developers, generally agreed with his demands in the end. But the fact that these changes were at the behest of a single source rather than a collective decision realized by the developers does feel like Miyamoto threw his weight around to solve a problem that perhaps only he saw. Miyamoto has cited a fundamental dislike of role-playing games in the past, which likely influenced his decision to change the direction the franchise was heading. We'll discuss how well the game handled these changes later, but the reception the game received at launch was indicative of the controversy surrounding its development. While critics generally seemed to like it fine, audience responses ranged heavily from mild positivity to general indifference to downright hatred. Now, those of you who have been following this series so far know that I'm not going into these later Paper Mario games just to bash them, nor will I defend them from their flaws if they genuinely detract from the experience. So with that out of the way, let's see how the game actually holds up almost 10 years later. Sticker Star begins with Mario, Peach, and the residents of Decalburg celebrating the Sticker Fest, an event that commemorates the annual falling of the Sticker Comet, which can apparently grant wishes. But uh-oh, Bowser shows up to cause problems yet again, touching the sticker comet, which grants him incredible power and scatters the royal stickers, the source of the comet's wish-granting ability, across the world. After helping the Toads of Decalburg recover from the destruction, Mario and his companion Kirsty, the guardian of the royal stickers, head off to recover the royal stickers and stop Bowser from destroying the land. Sticker Star brings the series back into the familiar 3D style of exploration after Super Paper Mario's detour into 2D side-scrolling, and Mario controls similarly to how he did in the N64 game and Thousand Year Door. The jump and hammer return, but otherwise Mario's basic moveset is very limited, with most of his arsenal focused on context-sensitive abilities. Despite the reduced controls, the game doesn't skimp on the action as the overworld has plenty of dangers you need to overcome. Sticker Star is the most platforming heavy of the Paper Mario games to date, with areas that require plenty of fine motor skills on your part to traverse through each location. Doing so primarily relies on navigating Mario across every room while avoiding threats, including stage hazards, traps, and enemies. Besides movement, your primary resource for surviving the worlds are stickers, which are found everywhere in the game's levels and can be added to your sticker book for later use. Stickers are used for just about everything that isn't getting around your surroundings, unlocking doors, changing the environment, activating events, and battles, more on that later. Through a process called paperization, Mario can place stickers or other objects into the world, or even remove parts of the level entirely and add them to his inventory to place elsewhere. This is your major tool for puzzle solving, and while it's often very obvious where something needs to be removed or placed, you still need a keen sense of observation to notice parts of the scenery that look off. While the previous games did incorporate some aspects of the paper theme into the gameplay, it was mostly just represented in the visuals. Here, the fact that the characters and areas are paper is directly referenced in the core mechanics, beginning the shift to paper-focused gameplay. And, if you'll pardon the pun, I'm torn on this. I absolutely love when games tie their art style into the gameplay, informing the ways through which you interact with the world, but simultaneously, the novelty of this design can only last for so long. You need to have enough solid gameplay to keep the adventure going after the charm of the premise wears off. Personally, I think collecting stickers and using them to progress is a cute idea, but does it translate to worthwhile gameplay? Well, as far as the battles are concerned, no. Battles are turn-based once again, but with the exception of blocking and running, instead of dedicated commands, all of Mario's battle abilities are done by choosing a sticker and executing your attack. You've still got action commands to increase the power of your moves, and getting the timing right is more important because there's a larger difference between effective and ineffective attacks. Timing your blocks is also critical, as while you have a larger window of time where Mario can block attacks, blocking too early means you'll enter a cooldown period that leaves you completely vulnerable. Despite the loss of dedicated functions and a lack of partners, I actually don't mind the sticker battle system in theory. While I'm not always keen on collecting one-use items that you constantly throw out in battle, stickers are so abundant that you'll never run out, and with how many different types of stickers there are, there's opportunity for a lot of strategic gameplay. You want to save your stronger stickers for tougher foes, so if you just need to dwindle down an enemy's health bar, you can opt for weaker stickers or apply a specialty sticker to a foe who requires more advanced tactics. This is exactly the thought process that works so well in the first two Paper Marios, and even other RPGs, and the concept is at least solid. The problems come in the form of little irritations that give way to major frustrations which ultimately cancel out the promising combat system. For one, you can't choose which enemy to target. Instead, Mario will only attack the enemy out in front unless you use multiple stickers at once through the battle spinner. That means if an annoying or powerful enemy is in the back row, then you'll have to either use a sticker that attacks all foes or just pray that they don't hurt you too much before you can get to them. The Battle Spinner, a slot machine that can grant Mario the ability to use 2 or 3 stickers at once, can honestly break a lot of fights because you can chain powerful attacks together and absolutely demolish most enemies. It's great for bosses though, and that's where it feels most appropriate because otherwise the battles become too easy. While you can sort your sticker album, you can't do so manually, instead relying on the game's auto-sorting functions to arrange everything. Usually it lays out stickers in a straightforward manner, but once you get more unique stickers with more space required and different effects, keeping track of where everything is in your album can be a hassle. These issues, and more I haven't mentioned, make this the weakest battle system in the series to date, and one that doesn't live up to the intriguing concepts of the sticker system. It doesn't have the rigid structure of the first two games fighting, and while it is certainly more involved than Super Paper Mario's combat, the problems it's plagued with just overshadow everything else. And shallow combat is one thing, but the damning flaw is that battles are essentially meaningless. You don't gain any experience points from them, only a handful of coins, which you'll already be drowning in elsewhere. You can upgrade Mario's health and attack power by finding these HP up hearts hidden in some of the levels, but that's all done through exploration of each area, not through battles. Thus, the combat is not only mediocre on a mechanical level, it also has no reason to exist as there's nothing to gain from it. From the second world onward, I was running away from most fights, which sucks because this seems to be completely random. Sometimes Mario will just trip over himself when trying to escape combat, wasting your turn and opening you up to opposing fire, and I can't tell if it's because enemies have different flee rates or if it's just pure luck. I'm fine with running away not being guaranteed, but there's no feedback that tells you whether or not escapes will work until you try them, meaning you're hoping every time that it won't mess up. But despite how important stickers are for battles, it's also possible to lose them if you aren't careful with the puzzles. If you apply the wrong sticker to a paperization puzzle, you'll lose it forever, so you need to pay close attention to clues in the environment to ensure that you aren't about to give up something valuable for no reason. This isn't a frequent issue, but it's still an unnecessary punishment for just trying a wrong solution, especially when you throw away a thing sticker. Things are special, things that you can pick up in different worlds, which you can then turn into stickers in Decalburg. They're very powerful when used correctly in battles, but they're also occasionally required to progress through a level. And as you can guess, if you've already used the thing sticker before you needed it, you have to collect it again, though thankfully the shady Toad merchant will sell you anything previously collected so you don't have to go traipsing back into a completed level each time. Again, even though it's not a huge problem, when I consider it alongside the other qualms I have with the design, it gets on my nerves. The game occasionally hides important objects and passageways from your view, and since you're dealing with a smaller screen on the 3DS, it can be very easy to miss something vital to progress. This is usually done for the sake of hiding alternate exits, which are sometimes optional, but often required to unlock pathways to new levels. Your mileage may vary on this, since you may be more adept at finding hidden locations, but I found the obfuscation to be a bit overkill here. I also wish the paperization mechanic was given more attention, because as it is, all it's used for is placing down or picking up objects. If Intelligent Systems wanted to emphasize the paper aspect of Paper Mario, that's fine by me, but for what is essentially the secondary main mechanic of the game, it feels very underdeveloped. Sticker Star features a world map system much like a traditional platformer, with each world divided into levels that unlock new areas when beaten. You're going to have to go through every stage to beat the game, with one or two exceptions, but the levels are fairly short, with most not lasting much longer than 40 minutes, and a few only consisting of 1 or 2 rooms. This makes sense considering the console, as handheld games are designed to cater for those who only have a limited amount of time to play and need to put the game down frequently. But if you're going through each world in one go, like I did, it is pretty tiring going back and forth between the levels and the world map just to move on with the game. This does make it very convenient to go and restock on stickers to prepare for a difficult stage, and thankfully, while it is still a problem sometimes, the game has less backtracking overall than its predecessors. As for the worlds themselves, what's interesting is most aren't confined to one specific theme, but rather combine 2 or more themes that complement the major setting choices. You've still got the grassy hills, desert, snowy hills, etc., but there's other elements at play in the visual design that give them a unique feeling. The hub world of this game is Decalburg, but honestly, I hesitate to call it that since it barely has anything in it. You can think of it as Toad Town with twice as many toads and only half the charm. It's very condensed, and after the prologue, you don't even need to come back here unless it's to visit the shops, although it does have an absolutely rocking theme. Surfshine Harbor acts the same way, really only serving as a means to house the boat that lets you travel to the last 3 worlds, making it really not worth talking about. But let's get into the actual worlds, which don't have overarching names, so bear with me here. World 1 is your standard grassland, a Mario tradition that no Paper Mario game has dared to break, so if nothing else, it's consistent. It's still a generally fun world though, introducing the mechanics gradually and getting you used to the battle system, and the shift to a mountain and fortress setting in the later half of the chapter is a nice change of pace. The world doesn't outstay its welcome either, with levels that aren't too long, yet still feature a number of cool set pieces and interactions. It actually made me excited to see what the rest of the game would offer, but man does the game crash hard with the second world. It's a desert-themed world, so of course it has more puzzles and mysteries in both the level construction and the world's story. All the design issues I mentioned are at their worst here, with stages manufactured in the least sensical way possible while simultaneously not giving players enough info to help them make sense of everything. Despite having the second fewest stages of any world in the game, World 2 took me double the length it took me to beat most of the others because I'd get stuck behind an annoying gimmick like the return of the 2D platforming or the aforementioned hiding of important stuff behind walls. It left a sour taste in my mouth for sure, and that's partially exacerbated by me plowing through the worlds for the sake of capturing footage, but even if that weren't the case, its problems would still exist. World 3 takes place in a forest overrun by poisonous goop, and it's a step up from World 2, but still has some lingering issues in its progression and flow. Throughout the world, you're helping this cute childlike Wiggler return his missing segments, chasing them around levels and returning them to Wiggler at his treehouse. I like this as a storyline, but it leads to a lot of doubling back, which feels like a waste of time, and honestly, a lot of stages just look too identical to each other, with only a few levels escaping the generic forest theming. There's some highlights here, like the level dedicated entirely to a game show, and the boss battle being a poisonous version of Gooper Blooper, but otherwise, it's still not that great of a time. Thankfully, the game picks things up in World 4, and to my surprise, carries itself through the rest of the adventure. This world is my favorite simply because of the aesthetics. I already typically enjoy snow levels, but the Haunted Mansion of World 4-3 and the theme park of the latter levels fit perfectly with the winter atmosphere that this entire chapter is soaked in. It also isn't afraid to have its own standout components that change up the objectives and story bits, from scaling ice falls to exploring a ghost-filled mansion to the minecart ride of the final level. World 4 never ties itself down to one particular style, and I really like that. World 5 is shockingly short, matching World 1 in terms of length, but still containing a number of interesting set pieces. It starts out in a tropical jungle, then takes you through a river rapid section, and eventually a volcano, essentially Chapter 5 of the first game with some cool new twists. It's another world that goes by at an excitingly fast pace while still featuring a sizable amount of content, and different content to boot. Sticker Star likes to switch things up between levels in its second half, allowing the game to maintain your interest if you're able to get past the initial hurdle of the battle system and weaker early chapters. The last world mostly consists of the final bosses, with the only actual level being Bowser Jr.'s Flotilla, a nice wrap-up stage that brings back the classic airship theme, leading into the showdown with the big bad Bowser. This is a suitably epic fight, spreading across multiple phases and requiring careful use and management of your stickers to avoid nasty attacks, like Bowser wiping away entire pages of your sticker book. Though not all of the boss encounters are very grand, this is a very worthy climax indeed, especially that second phase, which invokes the RPG hero is given unparalleled power to defeat the true evil trope. It's weird, I have a lot of issues with Sticker Star on its core gameplay, especially the battle system and level design, but I still found myself enjoying playing through a lot of these worlds. There are plenty of hiccups along the way, and the game is far from a great time because of its fundamental problems, and yet, I don't know, I think I still had fun with this title. There's a lot in Sticker Star to like, and also a lot of critical flaws that prevent it from soaring to where it could have reached, and that, to me, is the ultimate disappointment. But you know what's not a disappointment? The aesthetics. The game continues the same simplistic art style from the previous games, while adding more emphasis on the paper theming with fun effects like characters crumpling and folding. It's sorta hard to tell when the footage is blown up like this, but on console the game does look very nice, and a detail I noticed is how the game rarely pulls the camera far back so the player doesn't need to strain their eyes to guide Mario along each level, a welcome addition. I already mentioned how the game jumps through different settings, and the art represents them in ways that make them immediately stand out, especially impressive since there's 40 levels to explore here. The only aspect I have a problem with are the things, which are shown as real images plastered into the game, which in my eyes clashes with the simple arts and crafts style art direction. And that soundtrack. God, I have given a lot of praise to the music of Paper Mario, but Sticker Star absolutely takes the cake. The sound team stuck with one style this time, presenting a collection of jazzy tunes with a dominant brass and percussion sound and more emphasis on groove and swing rhythms. The focus is immediately apparent as you boot up the game, and the music is a constant delight throughout. Even when the songs incorporate aspects of the current world into the instrumentation, the soundtrack maintains the same lively beats throughout, making for a top-mark listen. And while it's not my favorite, the battle theme is a super jaunty song that's ridiculously catchy and makes for a great accompaniment to the fights. This is undoubtedly my favorite soundtrack in the series so far, though keep in mind I'm not super familiar with the music of Color Splash and Origami King, so it may be overthrown. I have lots of nostalgia for the first two soundtracks, but the direction here was something that stuck out to me right out of the gate and just kept getting better as I played the game. Unfortunately, I don't know who exactly the credit for the music, something I like to do because I want to give composers recognition for their work. While WarioWare composer and Paper Mario series sound effect designer Masunobu Matsunaga is listed as the sound director, 11 others are credited as the sound team, and even legendary Nintendo composer Koji Kondo is named as a sound supervisor. There are some familiar names who have done work on other Paper Mario games, but regardless, each of them deserves kudos for their work because they hit on something that sounds absolutely wonderful. But now we come to the part where we discuss the storytelling and character design, which I alluded to at the top of this video as the most hotly contested aspect of this series going forward. I already mentioned how instead of a complex plot with character arcs and intertwined relationships, the storytelling places a lot of attention into creating wacky and humorous dialogue. And I will commend Sticker Star on that front as the writing is pretty funny, and that's both a credit to the writing and translation teams. It helps that writer Taro Kudo previously wrote dialogue for the characters in SMRPG, and he was definitely a good fit for the job. But previous games could deliver funny lines while also telling a story that went beyond the Bowser kidnapped Peach go and get him storyline that Mario games have been telling for decades. I can't help but feel like a vital part of the formula is missing here, as while the stories were never the main draw for me, they did make the previous games more memorable. As a consequence of Sticker Star's narrative techniques, the story of each area gets its own focus, with the overarching plotline rarely going beyond the expected story beats. Which is fine, as previous games also placed a lot of stock into creating unique worlds for each chapter, but when that's the only thing you really have to look forward to observing, it is a bit of a drag. That's not to say that the journey doesn't contain enjoyable stories and characters, because it absolutely does. For instance, Kirsty is a really cool companion, a sassy, feisty woman who ropes Mario into the adventure in the beginning and gradually begins to trust him as a real partner. It's nice seeing her unwind over the course of the game, but never so much that she loses sight of the importance of her goal, and I really like her interactions with everyone. To be honest, I don't have a problem with the restriction against unique species laid out by Miyamoto, but Intelligent Systems took that restriction way too close to heart considering 95% of the friendly NPCs are toads. And toads are okay in moderation, but when you have the same basic character design representing everyone on screen, it can be confusing sometimes to know who's who. Think back to a place like Rogueport, where there were plenty of diverse characters with their own look that, in addition to adding to their personality, helped you identify them at a glance. I'm glad that talking to specific characters isn't required often in Sticker Star, because otherwise the lack of standout physical features would be much more of an annoyance. But you know what saddens me most of all with this storytelling? How much Princess Peach and Bowser were sidelined this time around. In the previous games, even though you weren't controlling them most of the time, they still had decent screen presence that was A, a nice break between levels, and B, important to the story. And perhaps more critically, it gave these two, who before Paper Mario were rarely given non-passive and non-villainous roles respectively, a way to prove their worth as characters. But in Sticker Star, Peach regresses back into the I'm kidnapped and helpless character that has hung over her for decades, and Bowser doesn't even say a single line despite him being the main antagonist. In fact, after the intro, you don't even see them until the final area, only hearing their names mentioned briefly in conversations. What the hell happened to these two? I get that Sticker Star wanted to go back to basics with the story, and that's fine, but seeing as how the other NPCs got plenty of witty lines and comedic bits, I'm honestly baffled that these two main characters are given nothing. Moment to moment, the story has enjoyable pieces, but when I consider it as a whole, it leaves me underwhelmed. But you know, despite all my issues with the game, I can't say that I disliked Sticker Star. To be sure, it is incredibly unfulfilling, with battles not worth the effort, significant characterization missteps, oddly implemented mechanics, and a general unevenness in quality, and no, I wouldn't recommend this game unless you're keen on completing the entire series. Still, the areas where Sticker Star succeeds deserve to be commended, and when all was said and done, I did have fun playing it, perhaps not at every turn, but enough to save it from being completely terrible. I know some of you wanted me to go full ham on attacking this game, but honestly, even if I felt that the game deserved it, that's not what I'm about when making these videos. I do consider my personal perspective, but I blend it with objective analysis and criticism, and from that lens, Paper Mario Sticker Star is not the worst thing I've ever played. Granted, that is not a high compliment, and hell, I'll say that this is certainly the least interesting game in the series so far, as even the simplistic stylings of the first title caught my attention way more. Forgetting about all the genuinely poor design choices for a moment, Sticker Star just feels tame in comparison to its predecessors. It doesn't feel nearly as bold nor as confident in itself as the prior games, and though it has some neat ideas, it only ever goes so far with them. Now compare that with Super Paper Mario, a title that I didn't enjoy, but that still had some intriguing and creative ideas. I may not have liked how many of those ideas were executed, but at least it felt like the developers were putting their all into making something unique. Sticker Star's gameplay flaws aren't as egregious, but it's often stifled by its restraints and ends up lacking as a result. It's less frustrating to play and thus is a more entertaining game, but it doesn't dare to be anything more than fun and cute, something the previous games could be while also delivering a bigger impact. I respect Super Paper Mario a lot more, but I like Sticker Star more because a simple idea done solidly trumps an inventive idea executed poorly. Having finally beaten this game, I do have a better understanding of the criticisms it receives, many of which I agree with, but I also feel it has enough merit to not be completely disregarded, and I wish the rhetoric surrounding the game were more focused on that. Spending so much time lamenting over how a series about a paperized Italian plumber doesn't have RPG battles anymore is just silly, even if there are legitimate reasons behind the complaints. You don't have to like the direction the Paper Mario series has headed, and to a certain extent, you can even be upset about it. But if you can accept it and move past it, there might be something interesting you'll find when you look at these games again. Or maybe not, you can't please everybody. Regardless, the Paper Mario series would march onward, switching back onto Nintendo's main console line with a Wii U title in 2016 that continued to experiment with different gameplay mechanics. And though it too distanced itself from the series' roots, perhaps it would still splash some color back into the franchise.